Hello and welcome to this channel. As you know, it is the current year. And if you didn't know, there are enough people out there to remind you and to expect you to conform to what this current year is supposed to be about. History, you see, is the story of progress, and if you don't conform, you're not supposed to exist. And if you exist, you're not supposed to open your mouth. And if you open your mouth, you're not supposed to be listened to. All because it's the current year. But this is not the only view. There's an older one that is not in tune with progress, but it is in tune with eternity. This view follows the river of time from its spring on top of the cosmic mountain as it flows down on the slopes until it vanishes in the infinite sea of dissimilarity, as Plato calls it. That's in the Statesman 273e. Those committed to this view see no reason to get carried away by history. Indeed, why should you consent to get drowned with so many others when you can walk on water and witness from above the waves what was before and what lies ahead? Why should you let yourself devoured by the tiger when you can ride it and keep your head up high? Worshipping the current year is the hallmark of drowning people. That is not what we were made for. It is not why we are here. We are here to be bridge makers between the sphere of generation and corruption, as Aristotle calls it, and the eternal principles behind all this. Only on the back of the tiger are we high enough to gaze into the world of the eternal forms and to understand the structure of this perishable reality also. Only walking on the ways of the great river of time are we high enough to see what was and what will be. An authentic reactionary can't be someone who has a more or less vague intuition that not all is well on the way of progress and despairs thinking about our current predicament. Progressivism consumes its devotees, but reaction should be something that uplifts its partisans, raising them above the times. If a reactionary is just a reversed image of a progressive, then we on the right can't expect to make much, progress. Our ancestors left us a rich lore on this subject, and for those of us who are not yet qualified for a direct knowledge, this reflected knowledge should suffice as a starting point. Our Western traditions, in harmony with the sacred doctrines of other people, speak about a sequence of ages that descend one after the other. Classical Greco-Roman authors left us with the doctrine of the four races, or ages: the golden, the silver, the bronze, and the current iron race, or age. After that, the cycle will start anew. But some modern authors, like Fabre d'Olivet and his disciple Saint-Yves d'Alvedre, propose something different. They say that after the descending sequence of ages, we'll go on with a new Bronze Age, then a Silver Age, and finally a Golden one, that is, an ascending cycle. This flatly contradicts what regular traditions tell us. But it does seem logical, so why did these sages of old not even entertain the idea? The answer lies in the principles behind cyclical becoming, and it is those that should be addressed first and foremost for the sake of clarity. In this talk I will address what we can see when we look behind in our past, and I will also discuss the cosmic principles behind the unfolding of history, as we have received them from our forefathers. In a future talk I will discuss what the future holds. What can we see if we look ahead to the rest of our current cycle? What are the prophecies of Hesiod, Ovid, and especially Plato regarding the future second fall of humanity that will usher in the last phase of the Iron Age? I have already made a short talk not so long ago as a response to Argent Templar's two petition podcasts, namely number 12 and 18, on the question of cyclical time, and there I simply sketched the principles behind the doctrine without going too much in detail regarding the text of our Western tradition that are relevant to it. You will find a link in the description below. I also expressed there in passing my disagreement with concentrating too much on the Eastern expression of the doctrine of the four ages, since we in the West are blessed with a well-articulated formulation of it ourselves. I think that our first duty is to our own culture, and we should refer to something like the Hindu tradition, which is alien to us, only to illustrate a point or to clarify better what our forebears left us as heritage. Also, in a recent episode of Plebeian podcast dedicated to the cycles of time, Adam Wallace discussed these subjects. Mark Citadel presented the descending-ascending model of cyclical becoming, and his argument was that it just seems intuitively correct. And I don't blame them, because it does seem intuitively correct. Adam even presented an image that aptly illustrates this becoming. But the problem remains, which regular tradition affirms such a teaching? None. If a tradition ever proposes something like this, that in itself is a proof that it is not regular, because it is in contradiction with the principles of cyclical becoming. In other words, it is not an authentic sacred tradition. So what I'm going to do here is to give a general overview of the doctrine of cyclical time in the West, concentrating on the classical or Greco-Roman tradition for practical reasons. But before getting into the thick of it, let's see why the Iron Age will give way to a new Golden Age and not a Bronze one. Because if we clarify that, we go a long way towards clarifying the principles of cyclical becoming. To understand that, we have to understand the relationship between the sacred center and the periphery. The center is, of course, the point where the axis mundi goes through our world. That point of intersection is the starting point for the unfolding of our world, just as the first principle is the starting point for the entire hierarchy of worlds. In fact, the hierarchy of the worlds is ordered along the axis mundi from the formal principle to the material principle. The first one is the center of the entire manifestation, while the other is the periphery. Analogously, getting further and further away from the point where the axis mundi intersects the plane on which our world is, we go from the center towards the periphery. The further we get towards the periphery, the more the order turns into chaos, and the ordering principle is swallowed up by the material or chaotic pole of existence. What goes for sacred space goes for sacred time also, getting further and further away from the center of our cycle, that is the Golden Age, which is the point of origin and reference. Disorder and chaos becomes more and more powerful until we reach the last period, the end of the Iron Age, which is the extreme periphery. Now remember the fairy tales that your grandmother told you or read you when you were a child. From what I remember, they were about a hero going out in the world to find and prove himself. In other words, to find his center. Where did he go? Quite often to the ends of the world, because if you want to find your center, or the center, period, you have to go to the periphery. Let me illustrate this with two examples from Greek mythology. We know that the center of the world in that tradition was at Delphi, so that much should be settled. Among his labors, Heracles is sent to get the golden apples from the garden of Hesperides. These were very special apples, since they were given as a wedding gift to Hera by Gaia. They were to be found in the garden that was far away beyond the western edge of the world. Heracles had small chance to get there and fly a mission accomplished banner, so Prometheus taught him how to do it. He was to go to the father of the nymphs, the Titan Atlas, who carries the skyvault on his shoulders. He could intermediate for him, so Heracles went to the western edge of the world, where you can find the columns of Heracles, about which the ancients said nec plus ultra, because beyond them there was nothing. Here the Titan Atlas, that in the meantime became a mountain, was burdened with a heavy load. Now let's pause for a moment. Where is Heracles? Is he at the periphery or in the center? If you look at the fact that the columns of Heracles are close, so you are at the western edge of the world, you might be tempted to think that you are at the periphery. In that case, consider this. Atlas unites the sky and the earth, two distinct planes. He is quite clearly a figure representing the world axis. So again, are we at the center or are we at the periphery? Consider this also. The legend tells us that Atlas agreed to go to his daughters, but asked Heracles to hold the sky in the meantime, which Heracles did. In other words, in order to get to the enchanted garden to get the golden apples, the hero had to become literally the axis mundi. He had to reach the center and identify with it. This is the description in mythical language of an initiation. In order to be reborn, you have to die. It is the death that leads to a superior existence, just as it is the periphery that will take you to the center. You don't have to believe me yet. Just keep in mind the model of progression. The second case that I want to discuss, and that is more detailed, is that of Ulysses. We all know him. He is a great hero who came up with the idea of the wooden horse and made sure that Troy will burn and its inhabitants will be butchered or carried away in slavery. He is a great Achaean hero, and as it is befitting a great Achaean hero, he starts his journey home by sacking another city. But fate will get him into the cave of the one-eyed Polyphemus. Cleverly, he will not give his name, but just introduce himself as Utis, or nobody. Of course, we all know that he is not nobody. He is a great Ulysses, the sacker of cities, and one of the great heroes. And as soon as he gets away from the Cyclops and he is safe, he reveals his true name, so that the accursed foe will remember it. But that proved to be a big mistake, because now Polyphemus can ask his father, Poseidon, to curse Odysseus, and our hero will have to spend another decade wandering the seas. It would have been better for him to just remain Utis. All of these subsequent adventures came from this impatience to give his name and be remembered. During his travels he loses man after man and ship after ship. In the end he loses even his clothing, and he arrives utterly destitute and completely exhausted on the island of the Phaeacians. He spent some time in the hall of the king of the island without revealing his name. The description that Homer gives us of the palace of the king is remarkable. Apparently, Alkinoos has a garden that knows of no seasons. The west wind keeps it in a perpetual spring, so all through the year you will find ripe fruit and blooming flower and every other stage that a plant grows through. Because of this, there is perpetual abundance. That's in the Odyssey, the 7th book, lines 119 to 141. This is clearly an image that evokes the Golden Age. Now, during the feasting, a bard sings an epic song about heroes of faraway lands, and since nobody knows who the stranger is, the song is about this famous hero called Odysseus, that they heard about, and his deeds that led to the downfall of mighty Troy. Listening to the song about his own deeds, the stranger reacts in an unexpected way. Let me quote directly from the text. The splendid minstrel sang it, and Odysseus let the bright molten tears run down his cheeks, weeping the way a wife mourns for her lord, on the lost field where he has gone down fighting the day of wrath that came upon his children. At sight of the man panting and dying there, she slips down to enfold him, crying out. Then fears the spears, prodding her back and shoulders, and goes bound into slavery and grief. Piteous weeping wears away her cheeks, but not more piteous than Odysseus' tears, cloaked as they were now from the company. Only Alkinoos at his elbow knew, hearing the low sob in the man's breathing. That's in the Odyssey, the 8th book, lines 526 to 532. Now picture this, our hero, who soon after this reveals his identity as the hero that the minstrel sang about, is crying. Not like a hero hurt in his pride, like Achilles for instance, but like a wife whose husband is killed in the defense of a city. Like a woman who loses everything and is carried away into slavery. Yes, he introduces himself as Odysseus, but is he? He lost his men, he lost his ships, he lost his gear and arrived here destitute and helpless. And now Homer shows us that he lost even his self-image as a hero. He really has become nobody. He started out as Odysseus, pretending to be Utis. Now he got to the point when he really is Utis, though he presents himself as Odysseus. The encounter with Polyphemus throws him off course, and he will have to wander for a decade far from home. Now he will get the magical ship that will get him home in a day. What we have here once again is the description in mythical language of an initiation. Our hero has to get to the periphery of his own being, giving up everything that made him the hero that he was, in order to reach the land of the Golden Age, the sacred center. From that point it is easy to reach any other point, because from the center of the circle every other point is at the same distance. He has to get to the center to be able to get easily home, and the center is once again on the periphery. I mentioned the former principle and the material principle that represent the two poles of manifestation, and we saw that the axis mundi is the line uniting and separating these two. But are these two principles really distinct? Well, that depends on your point of view. And I mean this literally. Depending on where the point is from which you look out, you might see them as being distinct, or you might grasp that they coincide. When you are inside the manifested world, you have on one side the center and on the other side the periphery. Above us the formal principle, or the Platonic good or one, and below us the material principle, or the indefinite dyad. But if you reach the edge of the world, where the rules crumble into chaos, you have reached the point where these distinctions disappear. Remember, in order to be reborn, you have to die. In order to reach the center, you have to go towards the periphery, leaving the center of your own world and pushing forward towards the edge. You find the chaos increasing step by step. At the very end, when the chaos engulfs everything, you bump into the first principle itself. Why? Because the manifested world veils it from your eyes. It is the chaos generated by the material principle that resists good order that will tear apart the veil of the world and will let you gaze on the ultimate transcendent reality. So when our Iron Age will get to its end and the veil of this particular world will be no more, what will we have? I say we'll have another Golden Age because that age is a direct image of the first principle and stands to the rest of history as a principle and point of reference. After all, the unfolding of history, as I said in my response to Argent Templars Patrician podcast, is analogous to the unfolding of the whole hierarchy of worlds from the principle. History is a descent because its model is in the descent of the axis mundi from the formal principle to the material one. It is cyclical because this descent generates particular worlds. The flow of history occurs according to the model of the world axis, with its different levels of existence or particular worlds aligned along it. History is just a particular application of the general rules that govern the whole of manifested existence. Just as, arrived at the material principle, the whole of manifestation is reabsorbed and you get to the first principle, arriving to the periphery of a world will get you to the center of the next world. Analogously, the end of the Iron Age of a cycle will get you to the Golden Age of the next cycle. So what will our traditions tell us about these ages? The first author to turn to is, of course, Hesiod. He doesn't talk about the ages, but about races, genoi. It will be the Roman Ovid who will use the term age, etas. Together with Plato, these three are the ones that will give us a good description of these things, and will suffice if we concentrate on them. Hesiod is the earliest, and he gives us a sequence of 5 races instead of 4, but I'll discuss the reason for that in due time. For now, let's see what we have about the Golden Age from Hesiod, then Ovid, and what can Plato refine for his audience from these myths. Hesiod, in his Works and Days, starts by pointing out that, quote, gods and mortal men sprang from one source, that's line 107. In a line preserved to us by Origen from a work of Hesiod that is now lost, we also read, for in common then were the banquets, and in common the seats of deathless gods and mortal men. That's Origen, Contra Celsum, chapter 4, paragraph 79. This is the starting point and the most important thing about the Golden Age, or the Golden Race. We come from one source with the immortal gods, and we had common seats with them at the banquets. Table fellowship presupposes familiarity. In the Golden Age we were conversing with the gods face to face, so to speak. The entire unfolding of history afterwards is a gradual separation from our divine kin, until at the end of time we are going to meet them again face to face in the next Golden Age. This first age was under the aegis of Cronos, the son of Uranos, and the father of Zeus. The aim of philosophy is to lead back to this age, or in other words, to make the philosopher realize within his soul a harmony that corresponds to the age of Cronos. Plotinus puts it this way: if someone admires this perceptible universe, observing its size and beauty, and the order of its everlasting course, and the gods in it, some of whom are seen and some are invisible, and the spirits or daimons, and all animals and plants, let him ascend to its archetypal and truer reality, and there see them all intelligible and eternal in it, in its own understanding of life, and let him see pure intellect presiding over them, an immense wisdom and the life of true Cronos, a god who is fullness and intellect. That's the 5th Aeneid 1.4. Plato expresses this communion with the gods in political terms. Quote, the traditional account that has come down to us tells us of the wonderfully happy life people lived then, and how they were provided with everything in abundance and without any effort on their part. The reason is alleged to be this: Cronos was of course aware that human nature, as we've experienced, is never able to take complete control of all human affairs without being filled with arrogance and injustice. Bearing this in mind, he appointed kings and rulers for our states. They were not men, but beings of superior and more divine order, spirits or daimons. We act on the same principle nowadays in dealing with our flocks of sheep and herds and other domesticated animals. We don't put cattle in charge of cattle or goats in charge of goats, but control them ourselves because we are superior species. So Cronos too, who was well disposed to man, did the same. He placed us in the care of spirits, a superior order of beings, who were to look after our interests, an easy enough task for them, and a tremendous boon to us because the result of their attentions was peace, respect for the others, good laws, justice in full measure, and state of happiness and harmony among the races of the world. The story has a moral for us even today, and there is a lot of truth in it. Where the ruler of a state is not a god but a mortal, people will have no respite from toil and misfortune. The lesson is that we should make every effort to imitate the life men are said to have led under Cronos. We should run our public and our private life, our homes and our cities, in obedience to what little spark of immortality lies in us, and dignify these edicts of reason with the name law. But take an individual man or an oligarchy or even a democracy that lusts in its heart for pleasure and demands to have its fill of everything it wants, the perpetually unsatisfied victim of evil greed that attacks it like the plague. Well, as we said just now, If a power like that controls the state or an individual and rides roughshod over the laws, it is impossible to escape disaster. That's in the laws 713a to 714a. Since we had this divine guidance in the age of Cronos, life was very pleasant. This is how Hesiod describes it. First of all, the deathless gods who dwell on Olympus made a golden race, Genos, of mortal men who lived in the time of Cronos when he was reigning in heaven. And they lived like gods without sorrow of heart, remote and free from toil and grief. Miserable age rested not on them, but with legs and arms never failing they made merry with feasting beyond the reach of all evils. When they died, it was as though they were overcome with sleep, and they had all good things, for the fruitful earth, unforced, bore them fruit abundantly and without stint. They dwelt in ease and peace upon their lands with many good things, rich in flocks, and loved by the blessed gods. That's from line 109 onwards. Ovid confirms and completes this picture in his Metamorphoses. Quote, "Golden was the first age, Etas, which, with no one to compel, without a law, of its own will, kept faith and did the right. There was no fear of punishment, no threatening words were to be read on the brazen tablets. No suppliant throng gazed fearfully upon its judge's face, but without judges lived secure. Not yet had the pine tree felled on its native mountains, descended thence into the watery plain to visit other lands. Men knew no shores except their own. Not yet were cities begirt with steep moats. There were no trumpets of strait, no horns of curving brass, no swords or helmets. There was no need at all of armed men, for nations, secure from war's alarm, passed the years in gentle ease. The earth herself, without compulsion, untouched by hew or plowshare, of herself gave all things needful, and man, content with food, which came from no one's seeking, gathered the arbute fruit, strawberries from the mountain-sides, cornel cherries, berries hanging thick upon the prickly bramble, and acorns fallen from the spreading tree of Jove. Then spring was everlasting, and gentle zephyrs with warm breath played with the flowers that sprang unplanted. Anon the earth, until led, brought forth her stores of grain, and fields through unfollowed grew white with heavy bearded wheat. Streams of milk and streams of sweet nectar flowed, and yellow honey was distilled from the verdant oak." End quote. The general characteristics of the age of Cronos are that it is an age of things not yet separated. The 4 seasons still live inside the primordial spring, and this means that the agricultural calendar is not yet in place, nor is there a need for it. People have all the food that they need without any work. It is an age of plenty. There are no oppressive political regimes. Harmony reigns everywhere. Social divisions come naturally along the lines of mortal and immortal, but those two have table fellowship. No laws are needed to glue society together, because union comes more naturally when you are closer to the primordial unity, the Golden Age being a projection of the first principle into history. This is how the Golden Age appears in relation to the subsequent ages of the cycle that it opens. Seen from the vantage point of the Iron Age that just ended, the Golden Age looks somewhat different. What is important at this point is to keep in mind that this is a description of the first age of humanity as it relates to what will come after it. This myth is very important today, since it dominates political discourse, but in a disguise that renders it invisible for the majority that is not informed about the intellectual history of the West. Expecting an age of complete equality with pleasant work and the cessation of political power is, in fact, a residue of this myth. Communism takes this imagery from the past and projects it into the future. The basic idea of communism, either in its Marxist or non-Marxist variants, is that in our future there will be an age in which all of us will be equal, work will be pleasant and not alienating like under capitalism, and the state will just wither away. Communism got its name from the so-called prehistoric commune, when people supposedly lived in equality before property was invented and the state was created. Therefore, communism wished to do away with private property and seize political power in order to do away with political power and social control itself, bringing forth a future age of complete social equality and complete political liberty. This is Golden Age imagery. No oppression, no toil, no political authorities. I already made a video on the subject entitled Victimocracy, in which I traced the origins of contemporary social justice ideology to these roots. You will find a link in the description. In the future, I hope to manage to make a video that will link the original Golden Age myth to modern socialism through the medieval and early modern millenarian movements. that took the mythical past of equality and freedom and projected it into the future. Because this is what socialism is essentially, an ideology that seeks to realize on Earth the Golden Age, projecting it into the future and making it something that man can achieve through his own efforts. But this is not the only way you can look on the Golden Age. If you consider it from the point of view of what went before, then it will appear as a time of healing. Those who expect at the end of the cycle another Bronze Age and an ascendant trajectory through the future Silver Age to another Golden Age are onto something. After the destruction of the Iron Age, there will be a dire need of healing. But this can't happen through the reverse progression of the ages, because that would contradict the descending trajectory of the unfolding of the cosmos from the first principle. This is simply a confusion between the descending path and the cyclical becoming of the universe. Both of these should be kept in their proper place. I should say though that since we don't find much about the Golden Age as a healing time, either in the Hindu or in the Western lore, it is understandable if some modern occultists will come up with the idea that I mentioned. The only place that I know of that explains what the Golden Age is in relation to what went before it is in Plato's Statesman, specifically in 268d up to 274e. Plato starts with the legend of the conflict between the brothers Atreus and Thyestes. According to Greek mythology, they both wanted to be kings, and Thyestes convinced his brother that the one who can produce a golden lamb should get the throne. Atreus, who had in his flock such a lamb, born with divine assistance, agreed happily, but he did not know that his wife had betrayed him and had given the lamb to Thyestes. So Atreus seemed to have lost, but he prayed to the gods to help him, and as a sign of divine favor, the heavens stopped their normal rotation and reversed it. The sun rose in the west and set in the east, and all the celestial bodies reversed their course. Previously, the brothers agreed that Atreus will get the throne of his brother when something like this was to happen. So in the end it was Atreus who, with divine assistance, became king. Plato tells us that this story evokes the age of Cronos, because then the sky turned the other way around. In fact, we can divide history in two periods according to the direction that the sky would turn. The natural direction is the one that we see today, but in the age of Cronos the demiurge turned it into the opposite direction to reverse the effects of the normal rotation. Of course, the effects of the normal flow of time is aging and decay, so turning the sky in the opposite direction equates to a healing process when the effects of time are reversed. No need for an ascending flow of history towards the Golden Age after our current Iron Age, because the role of the Golden Age is precisely that of healing the old wounds. Never mind that an ascending flow of time is impossible on cosmology grounds. After the age of Cronos, the immortal gods made the Silver Race. Now this is a curious age. This is what Hesiod has to say about it. Then they who dwell on Olympus made the second generation, which was of silver and less noble by far. It was like the golden race, neither in body nor in spirit. A child was brought up at his good mother's side 100 years, an utter simpleton playing childishly in his own home. But when they were fully grown and were come to the full measure of their prime, they lived only a little time in sorrow because of their foolishness, for they could not keep from sinning and from wronging one another. Nor would they serve the immortals, nor sacrifice on the holy altars of the blessed ones, as it is right for men to do wherever they dwell. Then Zeus, the son of Cronos, was angry, and put them away, because they would not give honor to the blessed gods who live in Olympus. And Ovid essentially is of the same opinion. Quote, after Saturn had been banished to the dark land of death, and the world was under the sway of Jove, the silver race came in, lower in the scale than gold, but of greater worth than yellow brass. Jove now shortened the bounds of the old-time spring, and through winter, summer, variable autumn, and brief spring completed the year in 4 seasons. Then first the parched air glared with white burning heat, and icicles hung down congealed by freezing winds. In that age, man first sought the shelters of houses. Their homes had heretofore been caves, dense thickets, and branches bound together with bark. Then first the seeds of grain were planted in long furrows, and bullocks groaned beneath the heavy yoke. This race found itself in a very different environment. Nature is no longer a friend and an ally. We have to toil to have something to eat, and the weather is also against us, so the first arts had to be invented to cultivate the land, to keep flocks, and so on. Plato tells us another interesting myth in his Protagoras, from the mouth of the eponymous character. According to the famous sophist, when mankind was about to be taken out of the ground, Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus, distributed abilities among the living beings. but he finished all the abilities before arriving to mankind, so our ancestors were to be naked and exposed to nature. Prometheus stole the fire for us and wisdom in the practice of arts from Hephaestus and Athena. That's in Protagoras 321d. This much was enough for humans to survive and produce food, build shelters, and make clothing, but it was not enough for the fight against wild animals. For that, political wisdom was needed, but that was with Zeus. So mankind was losing the war with the wild beasts because humans were not able to stay together in communities without wronging each other. But Zeus got afraid that mankind was to be wiped out of the face of the earth, so he sent Hermes to bring people shame and justice, aidos and dike, which are at the basis of all human cooperation. Henceforth humans could live in organized societies. We have here the two states of nature, the Hobbesian and the one imagined by Rousseau. Thomas Hobbes justified political power because, according to him, the state of nature is a perpetual war of all against all. Jean-Jacques Rousseau saw the state of nature as a happy state of equality and freedom that came to an end with the advent of property and ordered society. They are talking about two different realities. The Hobbesian state of nature is that of the beginning of the Silver Age, that Protagoras here describes. Rousseau is taking as a point of reference something closer to the Golden Age. The important thing for us to take away from all this is that shame, aidos, and justice, dike, have been given to humans at the beginning of the Silver Age, when our divine shepherds were not with us anymore. These two are here to coagulate society in the absence of direct divine guidance, much in the same way, I would say, that wine was given to mankind as substitute of the nectar of the gods that renders immortal. In other words, aidos and dike are reflections on the mortal plane of divine qualities. They are also two goddesses that humans are called to respect and revere. As long as they are with us, human cooperation is possible, and thus history can continue to unfold. Next comes the Bronze Race, or Age. Hesiod describes them this way. Zeus the father made a third generation of mortal man, a brazen race sprung from the ash trees, and it was in no way equal to the Silver Age, but was terrible and strong. They loved the lamentable works of Ares and deeds of violence. They ate no bread, but were hard of heart, like adamant, fearful men. Great was their strength, and unconquerable the arms which grew from their shoulders on their strong limbs. Their armor was of bronze, and their houses of bronze, and of bronze were their implements. There was no black iron. They were destroyed by their own hands, and passed to the dank house of chill Hades, and left no name. Terrible though they were, black death seized them, and they left the bright light of the sun. Ovid doesn't have much to say, but what he says seems confusing at first glance. Quote, next after this, and third in order, came the brazen race, of sterner disposition, and more ready to fly to arms, savage, but not yet impious. So what defines this race is its warlike character. Hesiod even tells us that they sprung from ash trees, which by itself tells the whole story. In ancient Hellas, the iconic weapon was the spear, much in the same way that we today would refer to the sword. The shaft of the spear was made, as a rule, of ash wood, so to say that a race sprung from ash trees is like saying that a people is made of sword steel. These did not leave their names behind, just as those of the previous ages did not leave us their names. That is because the separation between the ages throws a providential curtain over the past. We don't know much about these past ages because we shouldn't. It is in our benefit not to be exposed to the residues of past ages, just as we recoil from lingering in haunted places where tragic events left behind psychic residues. There's nothing good for us in uncovering past ages that ran their allotted course. Names are powerful invocative talismans. They have power in them that is not proper for us to have. The Bronze race was destroyed by its warlike character. This was their calling in accordance with their place in the cycle, and as it is proper and to be expected, it was what destroyed them also. Knowledge is the calling and the downfall of a priestly caste when knowledge degenerates into magic. The saga of Hrolfkraki is an excellent example of the fight of the warrior class against the degenerate residues of the priestly caste. The warrior class, however, has its own allotted time, and when the degenerative forces of the cycle call for it, its downfall will come from its own vocation. Now, you probably noticed that Ovid specifically mentions that this race was not yet impious, while Hesiod attributes the downfall of the previous race, the Silver Race, to impiety. So what are we dealing with here? What we are dealing with here are two perspectives on the same realities. For Hesiod, the silver race fell because of impiety, the bronze race because it was warlike, and the iron race will fall because of vices connected to wealth and bodily things. So what he does is to link, in all these cases, the downfall of a particular race to the vices of a particular social class. This suggests that the silver race was more of a priestly character, the bronze race was more aristocratic, while our current iron race is more attuned to the third estate values, in accordance with its proper vocations. When Ovid, on the other hand, says about the bronze race that it was not yet impious, he means it in comparison with the current age that we live in. After the bronze race, we have a divergence in Hesiod and Ovid. Hesiod introduces the so-called heroic race between the former race and the current iron race. Is this a deviation from tradition? No, it is not. The race of heroes was crucial for Greek religion, both in its exoteric and its esoteric aspects. This is what Hesiod says. But when the earth had covered this generation also, Zeus, the son of Cronos, made yet another, the fourth upon the fruitful earth, which was nobler and more righteous, a godlike race of hero men, who are called demigods, the race before our own, through the boundless earth. Grim war and dread battle destroyed a part of them, some in the lands of Cadmus at seven-gated Thebes, when they fought for the flocks of Oedipus, and some when it had brought them in ships over the great sea gulf to Troy, for rich-haired Helen's sake. There death's end enshrouded a part of them. But to the others Father Zeus, the son of Cronos, gave a living and an abode apart from man, and made them dwell at the ends of earth. And they live untouched by sorrow in the islands of the blessed along the shore of the deep swirling ocean, happy heroes for whom the grain-giving earth bears honey-sweet fruit flourishing thrice a year, far from the deathless gods, and Cronos rules over them. For the father of man and gods released him from his bonds, and these last equally have honor and glory." End quote. The heroes were very important for the civic religion of the polis, because the royal and noble families traced back their genealogies to one or the other of their number. They themselves were the offspring of immortal gods and mortal women or men. Zeus is particularly famous for his sexual prowess during this time, and many heroes could claim him as a father. Heracles resembled his divine father in this, that he was a man of many conquests, and not only in battle. Many houses in the historic times would claim descent from him. What we have here in the form of legend is the reality that there was a time quite close to us when the divine forces of the cosmos intervened directly into human affairs, giving them a push in the right direction. In this sense, the Age of Heroes resembles the Golden Age, when gods and men share the same table and altar of sacrifice. Notice also that we have the names of these heroes, which is not the case with their warrior predecessors, as we have seen, so they are not really part of a different age. So from all this we can guess why Hesiod presents a fifth age, while Ovid is not mentioning them in his general presentation of the four ages. They do not belong to a separate age, as the other races, but are part of our current Iron Age, and represent a subdivision of it. Concretely, they represent the Golden Age of the Iron Age. Just as the Golden Age proper is the point of reference for the entire cycle, the heroes and their race is the point of reference for the Iron Age in particular. There is something golden about them, and they have a special connection to the deathless gods. This has some important consequences both for the life of the polis in the here and now, and of the soul in the afterlife. In other words, the cult of heroes is crucial both for the exoteric religion of the community and the esoteric religion of the soul and its destiny after death. Given their special relationship with the gods, it is their bloodline that supplies the legitimate shepherds of the human flock, as a scale image of the Golden Age, when the immortal daimons sent by the demiurge were kings over mortal men. These heroes were literally coming from other worlds. I made a video on the subject of sacred kingship, concentrating on Penelope and Odysseus, but with parallel examples from Norse and Celtic legends. I will leave a link in the description for those who want to find out more about the connection between heroes, bridges to other worlds, and the good ordering of an earthly kingdom. Also notice that after their death the heroes go to a place that resembles the Golden Age. In fact, after death the heroes will continue their existence under the king of the Golden Age, Cronos, on an island on the western edge of the world. The conditions on this island are the same as those of the Age of Cronos. Religious cults like Orphism were dedicated to help the initiate to join the company of those who dwell on these blessed islands. So the heroic race is a link to the golden race in this too, that they represent our gateway to the original Golden Age and its blessed conditions. At this point I should mention the anecdote that goes back to Speusippus, the nephew and heir of Plato at the head of the academy. The earthly father of the future Aristocles was cautioned in a dream against approaching his wife, because Apollo had other designs with her. And in fact, when he tried to approach her despite a warning, he was unable to consummate anything. This young babe that his parents called Aristocles is known to history as Plato. What this story tells us is that the philosopher is of the race of heroes. So his teachings hold the key to the proper political order and to divinization. And in fact, exoteric political order and esoteric initiation constitute the two defining directions of Platonism. The important thing is that we should be aware of the symbolism behind the anecdote, otherwise we'll just treat it as a forgettable little curiosity. It is anything but. On the contrary, it gives you, in a nutshell, the whole aim of the Platonic project. On this note, I will end my talk now, because I already said quite a lot. In the near future, I will make another video dealing with our current age, that of the Iron Race, and the prophecies of Hesiod, Ovid, and Plato regarding the last stages of it. As soon as I finish it, you will have the link in the description. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. If you have observations to make, or you think that I glossed over something that should have been said, or you think that I'm simply wrong, share that in the comment box.